Hi, welcome to Usher and Yemi's channel. So today we're going to cover the Ant Hill Kids. I'm going to play a podcast which explains about the Ant Hill Kids cult. And yeah, just listen and whenever you listen on the playback, take time to listen to the story. Thank you. Bye. Thank you. I'm saying bye already. Thank you.
And the Anthill Kids. Roch Thériault was born on May the 16th, 1947 to Hyacinthe and Pierrette Thériault. They lived in the French-Canadian area of Saguenay, Quebec, Canada, and he was the second of 7 children. His family was working class but not struggling, and as he grew up he never complained about his home life, which was, it seems, relatively comfortable. At age 6, the family relocated, moving to a small city in southern Quebec. His parents were devoutly religious people and members of the Pilgrims of St. Michael, a religious organisation that often takes the name Beret Blanc, or the White Berets. This was a reference to the white beret hat they wore as part of the order's uniform. The White Berets were a strange mix of religion and politics. Born from the Great Depression, they pushed an ideology of democratised consumerism, essentially a giant version of a profit-sharing cooperative. Despite being largely dismissed by economists, and they were criticised for their anti-Semitic agenda, they drew in followers by promoting their message via The Journal, a pamphlet delivered door-to-door by members of the church. Roch's parents would often drag him around the city of Thetford Mines as they undertook their religious duty, dressed in their militaristic berets, spreading the word. Naturally, Roch caught flack for this, and he grew up to despise the White Berets and organised religion in general. Outside of their religious fervour, however, his parents were seen by the local communities as well-meaning and the family pretty unexceptional. Roch attended the local school until 7th grade and was praised by his teachers for his intellect. Unfortunately, 7th grade was as far as the local school stretched, and rather than travel, Roch, along with his brothers and sisters, all finished their education upon graduation, and instead chose to work or study at home. Roch took to reading the Old Testament and teaching himself Bible studies in English. Later on in his life, he complained about his childhood, insisting that his parents were drunks, that they beat him, and at one point they pushed him down the stairs. He wrote in a letter during his later life that, "I am from a family in which I was mistreated and beaten worse than a dog from the age of 2 until 14. When my father, having beaten me, threw me out of the house and told me never to set foot in it again." I'll leave you to draw your own conclusions on the truth of the statement. However, friends of the family don't remember any such behaviour, and his father simply stated on the issue, "I never beat the boy, but I punished him when he needed it." Roch also mentioned how he was born from an incestuous relationship, though once again, there was no evidence for this either. Either way, it all seems unlikely, and given all the evidence, and as much as Roch would later fantasise about his victimisation, his early life seemed to have passed by uneventfully. On November the 11th, 1967, aged 20 years old, Roch married 17-year-old Francine Grenier. She was a quiet, unassuming girl from the neighbouring town. They moved to Montreal and spent the early days of their marriage in happy enough circumstances. Francine gave birth to 2 sons, Roch Sylvain in 1969 and Francois in 1971. Roch worked as a chimney inspector, and things seemed, once again, unspectacular but comfortable for the Thériaults' new family. In retrospect, however, this was to be probably the last unspectacular point in the life of Roch Thériault, and after developing stomach ulcers in 1971, things quickly spiralled into a pit of depravity that at this point seems worlds apart. After visiting a doctor about his stomach ulcers in 1971, Roch was advised to undergo surgery to have them removed. This was a procedure that was fairly common at the time. His surgery, however, was not a shining success, and whilst it removed the ulcers, it left Roch suffering from dumping syndrome, a side effect of the surgery that left him with constant abdominal pains. He was prescribed medication, however, he quickly tossed it out and instead took to self-medicating with alcohol. He became obsessed with medicine and anatomy, and he complained that he was dying, which unfortunately was not true. He lost work and the family moved back to Deptford Mines, where Roch took up woodworking and started a small business, selling various sculptures and small household items, such as mugs and plates. He also showed new signs of overt sexuality, a violent about-turn from his previous personality, and he also joined a local arm of Freemasonry named Le Club Aramis, getting involved in local politics. All the while, he drank heavily, and by 1976 was frequently visiting Quebec City at the weekends, using his woodworking sales as an excuse to carry out affairs and pick up women whilst his wife stayed at home to care for their children. This quickly proved too much for Francine, who left him as his woodworking business ran into the ground. Bankrupt and unemployed, he bounced between sleeping in his car and living with a woman from Quebec City he had been having an affair with named Giselle. The honeymoon period of this new relationship was not to last for long, however. Giselle quickly discovered the depth of Roch's drinking problem. Fortunately, a saviour was on the way in the form of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, a religious sect that Roch had become interested in and quickly converted to from his Catholic upbringing he so hated. The Seventh-day Adventist Church is a denomination of Protestant Christianity. The followers, called Adventists, like most religions, lie on a spectrum. However, in general, they could be categorised as fundamentalists, believing in the Holy Trinity, observing the Sabbath on Saturday, the seventh day in the Christian and Jewish calendar, and the imminent second coming of Christ. Followers believe that a book of judgment is studied in heaven to see who will be admitted, and in Christian mortalism, or the concept that the soul itself is not inherently mortal. Advocates of a conservative and holistic lifestyle, anti-gay and anti-abortion themes are nailed on. Vegetarian is also advocated, and kosher foods are prohibited. All in all, it's a pretty fundamentalist bunch. Their holistic and healthy lifestyle pursuits especially appealed to Roch, however, and he dove into this new religion head first, quickly quitting drinking and smoking, and he met with a small group of local Adventists led by a Guadeloupean pastor named Pierre Zita every Saturday in a motel to hear him preach on the second coming of Christ and the importance of conservative living. As he was still currently unemployed, he rather ironically, given the similar upbringing he so despised, began selling Adventist literature door to door, and with his enthusiasm for the doctrine and obvious charisma, he excelled. In early 1977, Pierre Zita, taking note of Roch's obvious talent and social skill, put him in charge of a program to help potential followers of the church quit smoking. Roch embraced this role as a workshop leader, and by late summer of 1977 he had attracted a small local following of devout stragglers. They were mostly young people, disillusioned or suffering grief in one way or another. They consisted of 21-year-old Solange Poillard, 19-year-old Chantal Labrie, 18-year-old Francine Laflamme, 20-year-old Nicole Ruel, 18-year-old Maurice, 24-year-old Claude Houlet, 24-year-old José Pelletier, and husband and wife Jacques Giguère and Maurice Grenier, who were 24 and 23-year-olds respectively. Maurice was not overly keen on the Adventists, nor on Roch, but humouring her husband, she went along as support. One can see the obvious trend that the group was made up mostly of young women who found Roch to be charming, and Roch himself enjoyed the attention his position garnered. The group met up at weekends, staying in Giselle's apartment whilst Roch gave lengthy sermons about the imminent second coming of Christ, an idea that he had by now gone all in on. Roch convinced Giselle to convert to the Adventists, and the members of the group studying at college to promptly drop out. After all, what use is an education when the end of the world is so near? Whether or not convincing the group members to drop out from college was premeditated early steps towards isolation, or driven by bitter jealousy is unknown. but Roch was taking steps to isolate the members of the group from outsiders, even at this point. During the summer of 1977, the group took off together for an Adventist retreat on the banks of Lake Rousseau, Ontario, and met Gabrielle Lavelle, a nurse from Ontario, and Yolande Junebert, a young Frenchwoman. The pair quickly fell in with the group, and Roch was happy to bring them aboard. Whilst out hiking alone during the retreat, Roch reached a rocky outcrop and looked out over the landscape. He had a divine vision. The sky lit up in a bright white light, and the voice of God spoke to him, pointing out that the outcrop was a holy place. God was apparently not so busy that day and keen to give Roch a little bit of tourist information in his downtime. This was enough to convince Roch that the best idea for his small group was to move out of the city, and after the retreat was over, in October of 1977, he encouraged them all to follow him down to Sainte Marie in the Beauce region of Canada, 65 kilometres south of Quebec. They rented a 2-storey house together and opened the Healthy Living Clinic, an alternative medicine venue that used their connections with the Adventists to sell organic food and holistic literature. Roch also commissioned uniforms for the followers, green ankle-length tunics for the women and beige tunics for the men. He himself, as the leader, wore a tunic of dark brown just to ensure that he was to set himself apart from the rest. The clinic actually started doing relatively well, and it was making money and attracting more followers. One, Leo-Marc Fourcher, joined up and quickly sold all of his possessions to fund the clinic, along with Jacques Guiguier and his wife Maurice Grenier, who did the same. Giselle was becoming itchy watching Roch surrounded by young women every day, and so she proposed to him, and the pair married on January the 8th, 1978 at an Adventist church in Montreal. In March of 1978, a man by the name of Auclair fell in with the group. His wife, Geraldine, was suffering from leukemia and undergoing treatment in a hospital in Quebec. Roch wasn't keen on this treatment, and he decided to visit Geraldine and promptly fought with the doctors concerning her course. In particular, he took issue with the amount of drugs the treatment issued her, and using this line, he convinced the husband to forcibly check her out of the hospital and have her moved to the clinic to undergo treatment from Roch instead. Roch prohibited Geraldine's father from visiting the clinic and prescribed the treatment of grape juice and organic foods. Geraldine died in the clinic soon thereafter, and Roch told his followers he had brought her momentarily back to life by kissing her. However, you know, when God wants people, he takes them. It was Geraldine's time. Through his anti-smoking workshop, he had met the parents of 19-year-old MS sufferer Gabrielle Nadeau, who now checked their daughter into the clinic to undergo Roch's treatment. The Adventists back in Quebec, they weren't overly keen on the news they were hearing coming from the clinic, and relations between Roch and Pierre Zita soured. By the spring of 1978, Zita was meeting with parents of Roch's followers to persuade them to bring their children home, and he even tried to convince Giselle to leave Roch. In April, it all proved too much, and Roch was officially removed from the Adventist church on Zita's initiative. How much this bothered Roch by this point is up for debate, but it certainly didn't stop him from preaching to his followers concerning the second coming of Christ. Instead, he doubled down, marrying his followers together, pairing Claude Delette with Solange Boillard and Jacques Fessé with Nicole Ruel, despite neither couple showing much interest in each other previously. The one problem for Roch now was that he had no more connections with the Adventists, and that led to the drying up of the literature and stock lines for the clinic, and the business suffered financially. The end of the clinic was nearing, and so Roch abandoned the venture, and in July of 1978 moved the group to the small village of Fleur-Saint-Laurent, where they stayed for a month. On July the 6th, he dropped a bombshell on his ragged band. The world was going to end on February the 17th, 1979. A storm of boulder-sized hail would fall from the sky, there would be earthquakes and huge lightning storms, and they themselves were to become God's chosen. A few days later, they headed out on foot into the Gaspe Peninsula to find their new, presumably rather temporary, home. On July 9th, 1978, the group headed out and found a small hill and lake. They erected a ramshackle tent town and began construction on a large communal wood cabin. Roch christened the patch of wilderness that would serve as their home until the end of the world as Eternal Mountain. He gave the followers new uniforms of dark blue wraps, all the easier to work in, something which they had to do an awful lot of. Roch drove them like slaves, ordering them to work 17-hour days to build the cabin and dig a well. Along with the lack of sleep, Roch also rationed their food, and the group quickly learnt not to complain about tiredness or hunger, as any disgruntled opinions were met with further restrictions on the meagre rations they were being issued daily. This all proved too much for some, and Yolande Junebert fled to France, claiming that her passport was out of date, and Leo-Marc Fourcher too, now bereft of house or possessions after his donations to the clinic, decided to turn tail out of there with nothing. By September, the cabin was complete, which Roch quickly claimed to the group as a miracle, and renamed each of them with biblical names. He didn't skip over himself naturally and took the name Moses, though most of the group affectionately called him Pappy and his wife Giselle Mummy. He then dissolved all marriages within the group except his own, and married all of the women so that he now had just the 9 wives. He stopped short of marrying Maurice Grenier, the wife of Jacques Giguier, who had still not warmed to him and whom he despised all the more for it. Later that evening, Nicole Ruel confessed to Giselle that she had slept with Roch whilst they were building the cabin, and this proved enough to drive her away. Giselle fled into the surrounding woods. However, Roch chased her down, choked her, and demanded she return, which she eventually did. In the outside world, news of Jonestown had begun to spread, and due to this new threat, police began watching Roch's group in November of 1978. Roch preempted trouble from this, and so submitted himself to the police for a psychological evaluation, during which he utilised his skills to inexplicably charm people, telling psychiatrists that the group was a democracy, had no real leader per se, and he told them that they lived in peace and without promiscuity. Since the police had nothing on him, they simply had to admit that whilst he was clearly eccentric, he had done nothing wrong that they were aware of. Far from being unicorns and rainbows for Roch, however, this new life had its own share of stressors, and he began to drink again. He abandoned his Adventist diet and began eating and drinking milk, meat and cheese again. The group was struggling financially, however, and so he prostituted Gabrielle to a local grocer in order to supply them all with food. He would stand at the head of the large communal cabin giving long, drunken sermons, and if any of the group fell asleep or uttered anything close to a complaint, he would beat them with a 4-inch thick club or punch them in the torso, a punishment he dished out to a pregnant Maurice, breaking 2 of her ribs when she ate more than her share of pancake rations one breakfast time. If anyone gave him any reason to feel aggrieved, he made them stand naked outside, come sun, rain or snow. In a letter from Francine, the group's devotion to Pappy despite their near starvation by Roch is starkly clear.
Hello Pappy. I'm writing about what you said on the subject of nutrition. It's very true that I nibble, a damnable fault that I will never again repeat. The thought of ingesting such a large quantity of food in so little time discourages me, even if I work outside the entire day without eating. I ask that you forgive me. If it is stealing, I did not realise it. It is this fault which causes my plumpness. I do not want to be a fat and plump servant. That is too ugly next to the man that you are. I don't know what to think about everything and the meaning of my actions. I only know that I will not repeat them, and I don't speak lightly. I wish to be a true servant to you, my master. Alert, vigorous, with a clear and lively spirit, and well balanced to serve you every moment of my life. I have a long way to go. Thank you, Pappy. I love you.
None of these hardships really mattered to the group's followers, as the final day was fast approaching, something which perhaps added to Roch's current stress. February the 17th, 1979 came and, as we were all well aware, went. The world did, unfortunately for Roch, not end. Christ did not return and there was no salvation for the followers. Roch quickly concocted a story that due to God being, well, God, time passed somewhat differently for him than it does for a mere mortal man, and this had caused some confusion as to the exact date. The group could rest assured, however, as the end days were coming any time now. This yarn proved enough for most, but in April of 1979, Jacques Vissay left. Roch told the group he had been taken by the devil, and when Maurice Grenier talked to her husband of wishing to leave, Roch ordered her husband Jacques to cut off one of her toes with an axe as punishment. He promptly removed one of her small toes. April proved to be a trying month all round for Roch, as Chantal Labre's parents too obtained a court order to remove their daughter from the commune to undergo psychological evaluation. When the police showed up to remove her, Roch simply denied them access and saw them on their way. 4 days later, however, a Quebec newspaper published an article titled "They are happy and free to leave if they wish," which included an interview with Jacques Vissay, the recent deserter. 10 police showed up in a helicopter which landed on the Eternal Mountain, and they arrested Roch for obstruction of justice and ordered him also to take a psychological evaluation, which was to be carried out in a Quebec hospital named the Hospital of Robert Giffard. Roch not only aced his evaluation, he actually convinced his testers that he had saved his followers from a life of depravity and drugs. The director of the hospital actually took to calling him Moses, and publicly expressed scorn for the poor treatment of Roch by a prejudiced society who was suspicious of his alternative lifestyle. Roch was released early and judged fit to stand trial for obstruction of justice, for which he was given a 1-year suspended sentence. During the trial, the media too began printing stories of Roch, portraying him as a victim of prejudgments. The whole affair only proved to strengthen the ties between Roch and his followers, and when long-term MS sufferer Gabriel Nadeau fell into a coma and died shortly after his return, and the authorities denied Roch from burying her at the foot of the mountain, instead removing her body for autopsy, Roch used both events to strengthen the us versus them mentality he had been carefully fostering. Gabriel's autopsy later returned no evidence of foul play. In November of 1980, Guy Vere made his way out to Eternal Mountain and joined the group. Vere had met Roch in the Hospital of Robert Giffard and read about Roch in the media. He had been undergoing treatment at the hospital for depression, and as an outsider he was permitted to join under certain conditions. Gabrielle, the group's nurse, examined him, and once he was judged fit, Roch permitted him to stay in his storage shed. He was given a small wooden stove, 24 bottles of homebrew beer, 2 hens, a rooster, and 1 meal per day. He was essentially taken in as a slave and forced to chop wood and undertake cabin construction, as well as babysit for the 3 children of the commune who were not fathered by Roch. All the while, Roch maintained his outsider status. On March the 23rd, 1980, Roch organised a large party for the group. Something special was happening. His 2 sons from his first marriage, Roch Jr., now 12 years old, and Francois, now 10, were coming to Eternal Mountain to live. Vere was, unsurprisingly, not invited. That same night, Roch decided that Maurice's son, one of the outsider children, needed to be circumcised. Using a blade and a 94% ethanol solution for sterilisation, he took it upon himself to see the job done. At the same time, he administered the ethanol solution orally to the infant as an anaesthetic. The next morning, Samuel was found dead. Roch feigned concern that if Samuel's body was buried, it may be dug up by animals, and he suggested a cremation, and the group agreed. After 6 months of barely tolerating Vere's presence in the group, Roch had had enough, and on the 14th of September, he concocted a story involving Vere beating Samuel to death, and demanded that he now stand trial for his misdeed. Roch set up a mock trial complete with coroner, prosecution, defence and jury. Samuel's father Jacques was appointed judge, and after an hour's deliberation his verdict was passed. Vere was found not guilty by reason of insanity. Roch was wholly unimpressed by this outcome, and he took Jacques aside and suggested Vere to be castrated. The group put it to vote, and 7 voted for the motion, while Jacques, Maurice and Giselle voted against. Despite this reluctance by Samuel's own parents, democracy had spoken, and Roch set about talking Vere into submitting to the verdict voluntarily. He suggested to Veer that as a eunuch, his headaches that he had been complaining to Roch about previously and his masturbation habits would both be cured. Not only that, but it would see Veer promoted above the station of groups. He then made Veer write a letter of consent and finally left the decision on whether or not to sign the letter in Veer's own hands. He signed. Roch carried out this surgery on the kitchen table. This consent was obviously limited, however, as on the 5th of November he fled to the nearby town of St. Jogues and spilled the story of Samuel's death. However, he changed the facts, claiming he was kicked by a horse. Even after everything he had suffered under Roch's hand, he was unable to turn him in. Nevertheless, Veer's testimony was enough for police to raid the commune. Members of the group protested, parroting the story that Veer himself had beaten Samuel to death, but police went ahead and arrested Roch, Jacques and Maurice. The coroner found the group to be criminally responsible, and during their trial, verdicts were passed. Roch, Jacques, Maurice, Gabriel and Veer were charged with criminal negligence causing bodily harm, whilst Claude was charged with obstruction of justice. Jacques, Maurice, Claude and Solange were further charged with neglect towards their children, and Roch and Gabriel were charged with bodily harm with intent to mutilate for their work on Veer's castration. All of the accused pleaded not guilty, and all were unsuccessful in their defence. The group's children were distributed into foster homes throughout Canada, and on September the 29th, 1982, their sentencing was passed. Jacques, Maurice, Claude, Solange and Veer were all released on the condition they were not to return to Eternal Mountain. Roch and Gabriel, however, were denied bail, classed as a danger to society, and Roch was sentenced to 2 years prison with 3 years probation and transferred to Orsonville Detention Centre in Quebec. During his prison sentence, the group moved to Quebec, renting 4 apartments, allowing them to be close to their leader. The police, meanwhile, burnt Eternal Mountain to the ground. At this point, one would expect that we've reached the end of the story of Roch Thériault. The sad truth, however, was that Roch's reign of terror was just beginning. Roch Thériault was released from prison in February of 1984 and greeted with open arms by his devout followers. They suggested that they should collectively rent a house in Quebec, but Roch had other ideas. Since the last cabin adventure had gone so swimmingly, he instead convinced them to do it all over again, and on April the 15th, 1984, Roch and his gang set out to Somerville Township in the English-speaking area of Burnt River in Victoria County. Roch, of course, was the only English speaker in the group, and therefore their isolation would be absolute. By May of 1984, construction had started on a new cabin on Lot 4 Concession 5, a small patch of land which upon they built a cabin, kitchen, bakery, maple sugar shack, smokehouse, root cellar and a stone sanctuary for worship. Roch designed and built a sawmill from old machine parts and a horse-drawn watermill. It all sounds so idyllic, but the reality was far from it. Roch established a hierarchy amongst his wives, and Maurice, who had never fully given into the group, still tagging along for her husband's sake, was bottom of the pile. Roch forbid Jacques from sleeping with her, cast her out to a separate hut, encouraged Jacques to beat her, and convinced the group that a birthmark that she had resembled the mark of the devil. Despite setting up a somewhat self-sufficient little enclave, the group still needed the support of the government to fully sustain itself. However, Victoria County classified their household as a company rather than a family, and this left the group meeting a severe shortfall in funding. Instead, they took to shoplifting, stitching special pockets inside winter coats to aid in the job. On January the 31st, 1985, police caught Jacques shoplifting in the nearby town of Lindsay, and later tracked Gabrielle, Claude and Nicole doing the same. Between them, the group had over $430 worth of produce in their specially made pockets, and they were banned from ever setting foot in Lindsay again. Instead, they began selling fruit and pastries cooked in their bakery in a small pop-up shop by the roadside. This actually worked out reasonably well for the group, and Roch officially established them as a company, naming them the Ant Hill Kids, for the way in which the group worked together like a nest of ants. Despite their limited success as bakers, however, Roch once again began drinking heavily, and the spiral into violence and destruction started once again. His tirade against his followers included making the women nude wrestle. He forced the men to stand in the centre of a circle of the women whilst they punched and kicked them. Roch routinely punched and whipped them, hit them with hammers and urinated on them. If any of them sustained any severe injuries, he forbid them from visiting the hospital. After his bouts of violence, Roch would cry and beg God to stop using him as a tool to implement the Lord's justice. In a letter from Solange, we can see just how effective this was for his followers, who were now so downtrodden they actually felt the beatings atoned them for their sins.
Good day, Moses, my master. I would have liked to have talked to you yesterday evening, but I think it is preferable to write these things down rather than saying them for fear of talking too much. I am going to talk to you about the last fit of anger that your master exercised through you. I really believe that what you did doesn't come from you, but from someone much higher. For my part, I really believe that you were possessed by a very powerful spirit. That's what I saw in what you did. The throwing of the knife, the rifle shot, the harm done to Mammy. Her eyes saw things that went beyond them. My body is very afraid of all of these things. I understand it very well because of the law of death in which it exists. But within myself, I am well. I am very well and very happy to belong to a real master who himself belongs to the only real master of life. Love, Rachel.
On the morning of January the 26th, 1985, Gabrielle left her 5-month-old infant outside in minus 10-degree temperatures, lying in a wheelbarrow where he promptly froze to death. Roch had previously stated how much he had hated the child and how it had been marked by the devil. Bizarrely, the county coroner Al Lackett judged the baby to have died from SIDS. However, the local Children's Aid Society took note of this and began watching the compound very closely. In October of 1985, Maurice Grenier had finally seen enough. She demanded to leave, and as the only woman of the group not married to Roch, this was not seen as any real problem as far as he was concerned. He allowed her to go on the condition that she leave behind her eldest daughter, who Roch had lined up as his next wife, and she agreed, turning tail and booking it out of there with her 2-year-old infant, leaving both her daughter and husband behind. She wasn't done, however, and as soon as she found her bearings in the outside world, she hired a lawyer to regain custody of the daughter she had left behind. She testified to the awful conditions they were living in on the commune, and the Children's Aid Society stepped in, removing all the children, once again sending them off to foster homes throughout Canada. Now in the outside world, the children told of horrific violence and abuse against them carried out by Roch, including depriving them of sleep, food and education. Roch would hold blood sacrifices in front of them, killing a goat and smearing himself in its blood, and sexual abuses which, frankly, do not need repeating. All this was done in the aid of Roch's sexual instruction. The courts ordered an independent assessment be made on the Ant Hill kids, and when Dr. Raoul Huneau and Dr. Martin Milkovich visited the group, Roch greeted them with his most charming smile. When they handed in their 300-page report, it actually championed Roch as an alternative living pioneer, accused the government of persecution against the French-speaking population, and suggested the children to be returned immediately. Fortunately, the court saw through all of this and rejected the report, and on October the 26th, 1987, it ruled Roch as a manipulative despot, that the independent papers submitted by the psychologists were not objective and showed signs of positive prejudice, and removed parentage rights from all members of the group for the children that were now in foster care. During this time, Roch had met the Latter-day Saints branch president and forensic psychiatrist Jess Grossbeck. Originally attracted to the concept of Mormonism due to their views on polygamy, he spoke regularly and formed a close relationship with Grossbeck, discussing their alternative views on alternative living and theology. And still, back at home, the violence grew worse. As hinted at in the earlier letter from Solange to Roch, he took to acts of ceaseless barbarity. He broke Jacques' ribs with an axe, burnt Nicole's stomach and Josie's back with a blowtorch. He beat a 3-month pregnant Nicole, causing her to miscarry, and he shot her in the shoulder with a .303 caliber rifle. He broke Giselle's ribs with a pair of steel-toed boots, sliced Claude's arms open with shards of glass, pulled 11 of his teeth with a pair of pliers, and had one of his wives break Claude's legs with a sledgehammer. He eventually ordered Claude to wrap a rubber band around his testicles, and when this caused obvious side effects, he castrated him, cauterizing the wound with a piece of hot iron. At one point, he even took a vote for stoning Claude to death. However, the vote failed, much to Roch's dismay. He tossed a hunting knife into Giselle's leg, causing a deep gash in her thigh, and when it clotted, he filled the wound with olive oil, salt and spruce gum to keep away infection. Roch was quite the man of medicine, and he demonstrated this further when in the fall of 1988, Solange fell ill. Roch diagnosed her with some kind of kidney ailment and suggested immediate surgery. He cleared off the bakery table, made her strip naked, gave her an enema of molasses, oil and water, and then cut open her stomach, removing a random slice of flesh in the process. He then ordered Gabrielle to stitch the wound and declared her cured. By morning, Solange had died of peritonitis, a fatal leaking of her digestive fluids into her abdominal cavity. Surprisingly, this failure did actually affect Roch, and he ordered Jacques to shoot him, as well as attempting to overdose on Tylenol. Unfortunately, he failed at this too, and on October 16, 1988, he met up with Dr. Jess Groesbeck, his new Mormon contact. He told the doctor that Solange had died. However, in this version of events, it was from a spontaneously erupting vein rather than Roch's failed surgical hash, and Groesbeck reassured him that this was not his fault. Then things got a little weird. Roch told Groesbeck that he was his guide, as conveyed to him by God. He told him that he had seen visions in dreams of Solange inside himself, and images of Solange taking shape from his semen. However they managed to come up with the next conclusion is beyond any sane person's comprehension, but the pair decided that this had to mean that Roch was in fact now pregnant with the dead Solange, and that he was to give her a spiritual rebirth. Roch immediately arranged for a marriage to be concluded between him and the dead Solange, and dressed in his best costume jewellery, he ordered the exhumation of Solange's grave on the commune's land. He then drilled a hole into Solange's skull and masturbated into it. He reburied her and convinced himself that this whole macabre affair would bring her back to life. Possibly through fear of further desecration, Giselle told Roch that it was Solange's wish to be cremated, and so Roch once again ordered her to be exhumed. He took one of her ribs, which he wrapped in a sheath of leather and kept upon his person from then on, and the group burnt her remains. Not content with just the one rib, however, Roch filled a small jar with ashes and olive oil and kept that too, masturbating into the jar at times to ensure the rebirth was on track. It appears as if things were finally falling apart upstairs to a point of non-function for Roch, and in reality things were falling apart equally as fast. Roch visited Groesbeck once again and entrusted his 2-year-old son to his care in fear that the Children's Aid Society might take him away. Groesbeck argued with Roch about his treatment of his wives, and the pair parted ways on poor terms, though the child was left in the care of Groesbeck regardless. During the winter of 1988 and 1989, Josie ran away from the compound, and by the summer of 1989, everything was appearing to be in tatters for the Anthill kids. Roch, however, was not going to go out without a bang. On July 25th, 1989, Roch decided that Gabrielle's aching finger needed surgery. Not content with actually operating on the said finger, however, he took her once again to the kitchen table. He stabbed a knife through her hand, and halfway between elbow and shoulder, he cut her arm to the bone. Gabrielle ran away to a women's shelter, but Roch promptly convinced her to return. He then finished the job on her arm, cutting it off with a meat cleaver. He proceeded to leave it a few days before cutting out the infection and cauterizing the stump with a heated metal bar. Over 2 weeks later, Gabrielle finally took off, and this time she didn't return. She made her way to the hospital and concocted a story that she had been in a vehicle accident. However, police were called and they filed charges of aggravated assault against Roch. On August 19th, they visited the commune only to find the Anthill kids had all fled, either to Quebec or back to their families. On October the 6th, 1989, police caught up with Roch, and on the same day, Giselle told police about Solange's death. Roch's reign was finally done. Everyone trialed pleaded guilty, and Roch Thériault was sentenced to 12 years prison, though this was actually reduced to 10 years after the judge ruled he had shown genuine remorse and concern for the victim. Apparently, despite his mental collapse, he still knew how to turn on the charm when it was needed. During his trial, he merely stated in his defence,
If she says I did it, then I did it.
Jacques was sentenced to 5 years, Chantal 2 years, and Nicole 18 months prison. Police also pressed charges against Roch for first-degree murder, however there proved to be insufficient evidence to show that it was premeditated, and his lawyers made a deal to settle for a charge of second-degree murder if no further charges were to be brought against Roch. His final sentence, handed down to him on January 18, 1993, was life imprisonment, due for release in 2014. Roch served his sentence and was denied early parole on several occasions. He wrote poems and made artwork which sold online, and throughout his incarceration, he still took visits from 3 of his wives, Francine, Nicole and Chantal. On February the 26th, 2011, aged 63 years old, 3 years before his release, Roch was found stabbed to death in his cell following an altercation with another inmate. His children, of which there are a minimum of 22 and possibly more, were given to foster families throughout Canada, and presumably they went on to happy lives, including his infant son and heir, who he left in the care of Jess Grosbeck. John Hugh, a member of the Burnt River Council when the cult were active in the region, said of his death,
It was too bad a prisoner had to give justice, because Canada doesn't give justice to people like that.
A sentiment which, aside from his 3 most devout wives, will most likely be shared by many. Well, that's Roch Thériault.
Roch Thériault he's a very psychologically crazy man. He seemed like he was one of those ones who know his power. I mean, by giving them biblical names, calling himself Moses, saying that how he was prophesying. Um, I'm not actually surprised that someone took his life in prison because he probably was so used to having control over so much things. He literally thought that he can do the same thing in different places because he always got his way. He always talked people around, always give the bluff, as they call it in England. So Gabrielle, that he hacked off her hand. Let me see. Gabrielle now. Let me see Gabrielle today. So they talk about Gabrielle a lot. Gabrielle seemed the one who saved the ant kids. The chilling insight into the doomsday cult, where members were forced to break their own legs. Obviously, with every cult leader, this charismatic, which I said before, who believed he was saving his followers from sin. Let me they talk about Gabrielle herself. More or less said the same thing that they said in the podcast, but hold on. Let's see if we can find Gabrielle. See if we can hear Gabrielle's voice. Actually, you know what I'm gonna do? We're gonna have to use a video so we can hear and see her. Trying to find her now. Where is she? So even if I have to cut her out, it's fine. Right. We're gonna have her talk. Let me see if I can find it. One of her speaking in English. Oops. Oh, it's a big channel.
Deux de douzaine actuellement.
Il y a 24 enfants.
Oh, it's not in
Il
English.
y a
25.
25.
Ouais.
It's not in English. Oh, that's the only thing when you can't hear her talking in the English. That's fine. Even if we can't get her, that's fine. Otherwise, I would have to come back to her. I guess I have to come back to her. But anyways, Gabrielle. Um, she wrote a book about him. She's the one who wrote the book about him as well. Let me see if I can find her book. It's not even in English. It's all in French. So I'm going to show her book because she wrote a book about it. Let me see. So this is the book she wrote about what happened when she was in the Anthill Kids. And I'm going to see if I can find another. Oops. No, can't find their voices. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. Anyways, so Gabrielle wrote books about the group and what happened to her, and the podcast more or less explains it all. But it would be nice to hear the survivor, her point of view, but because it's all in French, It's a bit harder to comply to put it together. So he was very much a controlling person, evil person, that he thought that he can heal people and doing all these, so what he thought was alternative help by literally hurting people, um cutting the arm off, that I think he thought he was amputating her arm, or just crazy. He was sounded so crazy by himself. I mean, there is gonna be other stories that I'm gonna put on the channel to do with cults, because especially now that the time it is, there is gonna be a rise of cults coming up as well. There's gonna be modern day cults. Like, I mean, there is a modern day cult going on now, and there's a lot of similarities to different cults. So me putting up all these different cults is to show that that cult is an example of that, i.e., with the child per se, leaving the child out in the cold till it died. Which is quite cruel. Like, there was another thing that went on with another child as well, in this cult. I mean, he didn't. They didn't really talk about it, but this guy, Roch, well Moses as he's called, did a whole lot of cruelty to to the members. Um, making them master and slave, like doing the poly relationships, you know, making the men feel like making a man into a eunuch. Um, there is so many angles on this cult. Um, I will be looking at others, mind you, because there is quite a lot of cults to cover out there. Maybe other people have heard or read on the cults already before, but sometimes it's good to look at these stuff, because it's part of humans to want to be part of a group, want to be part of something. Even though most of the time, like, it's quite intellectual people that normally falls for cults, which is what happened with Nixon. So it's not. Sometimes people don't come from poor places or poor beginnings to be in cults. Like, these women obviously saw something in Moses that drew them to him. Charismatic, which is always mentioned in all of the news articles. He was a charismatic man. He was like, he always talked his way around stuff. He always knew angles. He was able to make them think that the even though it was a proper alternative medicine, but he was doing alternative medicine. He was able to get them to Mormon churches. Though he had a rough upbringing himself, and he decided to come out of some kind of Christian upbringing. So when you listen to more of the details of the podcast as the person's talking or reading through, you kind of get an idea. He was really unhinged from day one, really. So, but yet still, he was able to make people follow him, able to make people listen to him. So basically, anybody can start a cult. Really, it all depends on how you are as a person, how you can talk people around, how you can get them to believe in the same thing you believe in, that you are the savior. And he was quite good at that. There was a news article as well. Let me see, I can find the news article. Oh, see, there she is there, but I can't get her. I see her, but I can't see her talking. She's writing a lot. She's not talking. Oh, here's a picture of Gabriella with her amputated hand. Let's get rid of some of these takes so we can see where we are. Right, this is Gabriella with her amputated arm, and it's so close. You can see how close it is. Whoops, sorry. See Gabriella with her amputated arm. So this is the aftermath after the Anthill kids had been on the radar of the police for a while. Nothing could be done as the commune was officially a church, which is not unusual. And all that could be done was to protect the kids, which that guy spoke about. Upon Roach's arrest, most of the cult dissolved. I'm trying to find her aftermath, though. Gabrielle bravely and speaking out on the injustices faced at the commune led to a large investigation. This investigation led to charges for Solange's Ballard's murder. But I want to get her talking. If I can get her, if we can hear her voice, that's what we want. I want to hear her voice. I want to hear her voice. If I can get her voice. If I can get in English, it'll be even better. Doesn't seem to have her voice though. It's just crazy. It's only on. I don't want to go to investigation discovery because they just not nice. Don't know whether this is her. Can't tell whether it's her or not. Ah, it's not good. There's the mirror. No, it's the same one I was at. Where's your voice, girl? Can we hear your voice? Most of the articles just go through the traumas of what they went through, the sledgehammer knocking of legs and all that stuff. Nah, we can't hear her voice. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. That's fine. Because there's other survivors of other cults. Um, she is very lucky to be alive. The way her arm was cut, to be honest, I think if he did went any further and cut her arm any deeper, I don't think she'd be standing right now. To be honest, very deranged man. Oh yeah, there's the pictures. Let me show you pictures of him and the wives again. So he knew exactly what he was doing. He really got them really, a certain way, and they're young women. They're not old women. So you know, being he is an older man, and I'm not saying all older men are bad, by the way, but just considering he's an older man, he had a way to get around people by the looks to get him to do what he wanted them to do. So, I mean, there is a lot of information to draw from what was said on the podcast as well. And he was a very crazy man. I would say crazy, psychopathic, psychopathic. I know I say a lot on a lot of the bills, but he's psychopathic. Could be another pathic. I can't think of all the pathics right now, but he seemed to have a lot of that going on. A god complex. Yeah, he had a big god complex, and he ruined a lot of people. He killed a lot of people, children. No, well, one child. Um, Very manipulative man, I will say, from what I heard, because I didn't listen to all of the podcasts, so I put it up. And so I like to listen to it firsthand, just like you. And yeah, it's just that a shame I can't hear Gabriella's one because it's all in French. We can't get an insight into her as a person. So we just know her as the one who escaped the cult, basically. Um, so I mean, there's not a lot to say on this one, but I feel because I want to get the Children of God survivor, her voice a bit more, because I need to repost her again because YouTube really cut up all the parts what she spoke about, the most important parts, and I'm gonna repost her again, and then I'm gonna move on to a few cults because there's a few cults plus the one that's probably cults happening now. Like I said, there could be a case of cults were happening now, due to lockdown, whatever the case may be. So people will band together, and then it will turn into something sinister later on. Basically, that's normally what happens with cults. Something that's good turns into something pretty bad, which is what I said before. But I'm not going to be waffling on. Please leave a comment underneath the video of what you think of what you heard about about the Ant Hill kids. I did say Ant Hill gang because that's what I heard before, but there's what they actually called the Ant Hill kids, because he named them after ants who was building stuff and they moved together like ants. Okay, so with that said, I am going to go now. I might come back later. I see how it goes. So thank you, Ghetto Child, Big Philly OG, Claire. Oh yeah, let me see what Claire said as well. He's badly and madness. Yeah, he had a lot of madness. She said, yeah, there is a lot of cults across the pond, but like I said, there was one in South London. I'm gonna find it. I'm gonna dig up about the one in South London because there was one over here. Literally, I think he was in Brixton. There was a cult over here, right? Not too far. Well, not far from where I'm living. Like a bus ride away, you can say. Yeah. So, yeah, a cult. Well, I think it was called a cult in the neighborhood or something. I think that's what the doc called. Yeah, so I'm going to be talking about a few cults. This is the cult series starting now. This is one of the cult series. When I reposted about Nature Boy and the similarity to the Children of God. So I am going to get the survivor's voice because I like to hear them. I know there's quite a few stories, inside stories. Sometimes it's good to hear the inside story. Sometimes not always what the articles say because they come at the last bit, and not unless the victims give the story from the inside or whether they're being investigated. That's the only way you can hear and see what's going on, because any of us could be pulled into a cult. It doesn't necessarily nobody can say that, no, I wouldn't join a cult. Da, 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 da. You don't know that. So, and it's not always weak-minded people that join a cult. Okay, so we're gonna get that one straight. Um, it's not always people who have problems with families that join a cult. What happens is a collective come together. Right now, and I'm repeating what God bodies say. Right now, even on YouTube, there's cults formed because we're all following each other. I think it was God body said that, or was it World? One out of the two. Right? There's cults formed because like we're following somebody, we're following a YouTube, we're following somebody on Instagram. There's all different kind of cults, right? The only difference is that there's no one not telling you, okay, you can't go over there, you can't go over there, you can't go over there. Where. So people get it very twisted. I mean, I would love to study psychology because this sometimes it's the minds of the people. You feel that okay, oh, it's mental health, whatever. No, not necessarily. These people bring money and funds to cults. However, the cults is Osho, which I might have to do a rebuild on him. He was one of the biggest cults, I would say, in Oregon. Yeah, he started out as a little small man in India doing yoga or whatever he was doing, and then his followers took him straight to Oregon. Um, hi, hi, Sunset. I see your little face, Sunset. You remind me of Thai News. Um, yeah. So Osho went as far as Oregon. He had builders in his commune. They were building big spaces, wide spaces, gardens, you name it. It was like when you like, I don't know whether it's still on Netflix now, but you see how easy who's pulling the strings? Well, Osho wasn't pulling the strings on that one. It was really his consort. She was pulling the strings. And on top of it, um, a lot of people was trying to take over what he was dealing with. He was just a guru. That's how he started out. But I'm gonna do a build on Osho because they call it a cult. In a it's kind of was and it kind of was. It is a cult in a certain way because he was able to pull the pockets that he had on his commune. There weren't poor people. There was, oh yeah. Plus he had a whole lot of homeless people that came up to the commune and stuff like that. So, but there is a difference between the anthill one and certain cults. You can see there's a difference in them. Um, like I said, what always turns into something starts out something good, turns into something bad. Um, Deaths, whatever. Power goes to their head. They start being a dictator. They said, or sometime they'll like if they're like most doomsday cults to preach about the end of the world and like we got to stick together. Um, we got to make children or worse, the worst scenarios, ever. So this guy, he was a doomsday cult. He comes on the doomsday cult. There's quite a few of doomsday cult. There's ones that is religious based. The religious based ones is the worst ones. The worst ones. Mormons probably fall under that. Scientology falls under that. So, you can broaden the horizon, you can say. But I'm going to have fun researching these people because I just find them really interesting. Um, it's the aftermath. Either they end up killing themselves or someone ends up doing it for them. Jim Jones, though he killed so many people, he was coward. Somebody else had to kill him. David Koresh, even though he was making out like, yeah, they're coming in to get us, from the depictions or what I've seen or what I read of him. And then somebody ends up shooting him. But then people died on that commune. So it's a variety. There's others too. I mean, those are the most popular ones that is spoken about. Osho, David Koresh, Jim Jones. I can't remember all of them off the top of my head right now, but there's a lot of them. So, like I said, even we can be drawn into cults, right? So you can't say no. It won't happen to me. Da, 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 da. Someone give you an option, and you was able to live good and whatever, and you'll be able to have enlightenment along the way. A lot of people will take it because a lot of people's looking for peace of mind, looking for a place to fit in, looking for a place to be. Some people come from bad backgrounds, not necessarily gang related backgrounds. Some people come from hi. Some people come from backgrounds where they've been religious and that's all they know. They don't know nothing else. So they will fall under all the religious communes, right? Now, I know I'm going to start referring to Nature Boy. I'm sorry, I have to. Nature Boy is a cross between a religious one, a lifestyle, and something else. The only difference is that he's living in Babylon. He's not in Puerto Rico. He's not in wherever he was before. So he will be able to draw people who's into what he's into or think they are what he's into until they see him with what he's not. So, and that's just one kind of put it out there kind of thing. So I will be doing other series on cults. I'll probably have to do late night ones. I don't know. I'll see how it goes. I mean, because I need to focus. And we need to look at the mindset and the ones who was inside of the cult. I don't think anybody survived from David Koresh's one neither. I think Jim Jones' son came out, was the survivor, and quite a few others. So they were able to tell the tale. But fun because Gabrielle talks French, I can't really put her up, unfortunately, to hear her inside story, like what really happened. It come like you have to watch the movie The Messiah Savage. I think I see them suggesting. There's a book as well written. I think the book's called The Messiah Savage. So this is all I can say on this build right now because I could go on and on and on, but I don't want to waffle without black and white in front of me or something to put up in front of the screen. Because I want to give you a lot more, like a more full something. So with that said, I am going to come off really. Let me see what Claire said. Yeah, he held a woman for about 30 years. Yeah, that's the one from Brixton, isn't it? I'm gonna go and find out about the one from Brixton too. Oh, it's half term. I didn't even know. Hi, Sunset Gift. I see your little face. You got such a small face. You got a baby face. Um. Hiya, Millennium Royalty. Yeah, thank you for coming, peoples. The ones who passed through, the one who stuck around to the podcast finish, because there's some things I can read, but it's just their names. Right? Well, their names are a bit difficult for me to get around. My dyslexia ain't gonna let me get around that. So it's better if we listen to it, then we get an idea, because then we can imagine what's happening, what happened, how it happened, where it started from, how it occurred. This is what happened to the leader. I find I learn so much when I listen to other things. That's just my thing, innit? So yeah. So with that said, I am gonna come off as well. Royalty, yeah, take a look at the replay. Just listen, put on headphones and listen to the podcast, because it's this man was terrible. He was very, very crazy in his head. So with that said, I'm gonna come off because all the articles are just saying exactly what the guy just read. So it's pointless. Just going over all the articles. Yeah, he had a mental problem, this guy. End of. So with that said, thank you for passing through. Please comment. Let me put up the comments on the subject covered. Please put your comments. Please put your comments. And yeah, I have to do the like and subscribe thing. I'm sorry. I know people be liking the video anyway. Sometimes I don't even have to say it. But yeah, so um please comment underneath this. I know there's other people who's covered this on the Ant Hill Kids cult, but please comment underneath it. I put a church one. I spoke about a church one as well, a black church. So yeah. With that said, I'm gonna come off. Have a good day, a good afternoon. See you later.